Hi, everybody, and welcome. We're so pleased that you have decided to join us today. My name is Gwen Gringheis, and I am the Assistant Registrar, Recruitment and International at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design. So I'm actually going to turn it over very shortly to Professor Gareth Long to lead us through a presentation on our undergraduate program in visual studies. But I first wanted to just give you an idea as to what to expect. So we will have a presentation followed by a Q&A. And so we won't answer any of your questions until the presentation has been completed. But if you do have any questions that come up during the presentation, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them directly following the presentation. If you have any questions after the presentation, that is the perfect time to ask those questions as well. Just wanted to give you an option in case something did pop up during the presentation. But let me pass it over to Professor Gareth Long.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I will go through a quick overview of what the Visual Studies program is, where we place it contextually within the university, hopefully go through some of our unique offerings, and then, as Gwen was saying, turn it over to some questions. I apologize in advance. I have a tendency to speak very quickly. Partly that's because I am genuinely excited about our program. And so the enthusiasm sort of bubbles up and I start talking quickly. So if I have gone over anything too quickly, again, that's something we can ask questions about afterwards. I'm also happy to repeat myself again and again and again. So what we have here at the Daniels Faculty's Visual Studies program is, as it says on this first slide here, it is understanding that we're making art at a research university, making art, consuming art, exhibiting art, thinking about art, writing about art at a research university. So we're looking at art not just as a field of creativity, but it's creativity within a series of discourses. It's creativity and practice alongside the academy and alongside the sort of the field of study and the field of practice that is contemporary art. And as I talk, you'll hear a bit more about how we situate this in that particular way. So what makes us unique is that because we are at one of the foremost research-based academic institutions in the world, we understand that art sits alongside research, and art is a kind of research at the same time. But we're also unique in that we are seated in a faculty that houses architecture, landscape, urban studies, urbanism, and at the graduate level, forestry. So even within our small faculty, we are already a uniquely interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary faculty. And we try to emphasize this because in your first year as a visual studies student, you're going to be taking courses that are co-offered between visual studies and architecture. And that is exciting, and it's also a better way of understanding the world in a very wide way. And it's also one of the reasons why we're dedicated to this degree as a Bachelor of Arts, as opposed to a Bachelor of Fine Arts, because we're at a institution that has one of the best sort of humanities, liberal arts education kind of ecologies. And so we want to emphasize that and encourage it and ask our students to take courses throughout the rest of the university as well as within visual studies and architecture. And we've had graduates do amazing things from this program. I'm actually a graduate of the undergraduate program in visual studies a long time ago now. I think I graduated in something like 2002 or something like that. And I've gone on to have a massive art career showing in exhibits in galleries and museums around the world, and lived in lots of places like New York and London in the UK and Vienna, and has worked as a curator, as an artist in all of these places, and have come back here. And now I'm the director of this amazing program. But we've had people go on to things in film and illustration, but we've even had people go into things like finance, because one of the amazing things these days is that all industries are looking for creative thinkers. This idea to problem solve creativity is a fundamental need in all industries. And what happens in this program fundamentally is creative thinking and creative problem solving. We do it through the practice of art and exhibition. But people are taking this kind of thinking that we're able to foster here and apply it in all sorts of fields. I'll move on. So, as I've said, you're going to be getting an honor Bachelor of Arts. It's a 4-year academic degree. And we have two streams, which I'll get into a bit more, but we have two streams that you can study it in our program. Studio art, so that is the sort of what we traditionally think of as art practice, so the making of art as your primary output, and critical practices. So these are the arts and art adjacent kind of practices, things like curatorial practice, art criticism, arts publishing, all the things that are sort of in and around art, but aren't necessarily the things always exhibited, but still part of the fundamental machine and motor that helps the various art worlds function. And as I said before, we've had people in all sorts of fields out of this, and a lot of amazing practicing artists, including a couple of former graduates, Megan Rooney, who went off and studied their graduate work in the UK and has had exhibitions all over the place. You can see some photos there from the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf in Germany. And Alvin Wong, another graduate of ours who has also gone off and studied in the States and is exhibiting all over the place now too. And this is just a couple examples of a long history of really renowned graduates. And so, as I said, there's these two streams. And you can see here what are featured in some of these streams. And so in studio art, you have a lot of this sort of traditional media like drawing and painting, analog photography, sculpture, but you also get into things like installation, digital photography, artist's moving image, which is what we think of as when we say video art, all sorts of digital practices, including sound art, computational art, performance artist multiples. Basically, if you can see it in the contemporary art world, you can make it here as part of your practice. And often our earlier courses, like in the second year, some third year courses, tend to be more focused on the medium. But as you move up through your degree, you start taking courses that are more focused on themes where you get to make whatever you want. So one of the courses that I'm teaching this semester is called Contemporary Art Issues, where we're just talking about whatever is part of the discourse in contemporary art. And you're still making inside of this class. And I have students who are making sculptures. I have students who are doing performance art. I have students who are doing sound art, all inside this one course. And so even inside of our courses, we have a kind of interdisciplinarity written all the way through. And then, as I said, a lot of the critical practices courses are those things around art, like critical theory, philosophy, curatorial practices. But you'll also be taking courses with the studio students, and critical practices students will also, most of the time, also take some studio art courses. So even though they're the two streams, they often intersect, and that intersection often fosters really interesting dialogue between your peers and fellow students. This is a complicated slide that I won't spend too much time on, but you can see the kind of plan that you might have for your 4 years here. The first year is fairly straightforward and it's prescribed for you. There are a few courses that all of our students in Daniels take as they enter into their first year. You do have spaces for electives, and we often encourage those electives to be outside of the faculty. So if you're really interested in English literature or Near Middle Eastern studies or women and gender studies or chemistry or physics, whatever you want, take those courses. And you can see throughout the 4 years, there's a lot of room for electives. Take courses and bring that thinking back to your visual studies courses. Art these days is borrowing from all fields. Artists are collaborating with scientists, with engineers, with ecologists, with people who specialize in sustainability, with people who are doing extremely crazy technological advancement. Art is collaborating with these people. So why not take advantage of being at a university where when you study women and gender studies or you study chemistry, it's not just a random course, but you're studying with some of the best researchers in their fields in the world. So take that learning and bring it to your studio work, bring it to your critical practices work. And you can see here on the bottom of this slide, the critical practices stream, there's a few courses we ask you to take, and we've actually just expanded that. So here there are 4 courses that you have to take, but we've now expanded that to 6 courses, and you have to take 4 of the 6. So you have a little bit more flexibility than previously, but you still have the options to take lots of other viz courses and take courses that suit your interests. The one thing that we really try to foster here is that every student gets to sort of design a bespoke art education focused on what it is that they are interested in and the kind of practice that they want to focus on. If you have questions about the specific courses, especially the first year courses, I'm happy to talk about those afterwards. So as a bit of a summary here, in all of our courses, we're going to be engaging in scholarly research and creative activity. And again, sometimes we think of those 2 things as being separate, and sometimes we think of those things as being the same. There's a whole term called artistic research, which is quite de rigueur in Europe, in a lot of European universities. And we're working on something here around that term. But a lot of the time we think of art making as a kind of research. So it's not like there's necessarily scholarly research here and art research here. Sometimes that they weave, they intersect, sometimes they conflict. It's really fascinating. So we're in the practice of art making and the display of art in exhibition contexts. There's a lot of discourse through critical writing or artists writing, because artists sometimes write in a different mode with different methodologies than, let's say, an academic scholar. And then the public presentation of work, of discourse and dialogue around your own artwork and those made by other artists. And you can see here that thing at the end there, there's this direct experience through internship opportunities, which I can definitely talk more about. But also this idea of experience. These days we talk a lot about experiential learning. And one of the things that's amazing about visual studies is that all of your courses are in many ways fundamentally experiential. You are making work and you are studying with practicing artists, practicing curators. None of the faculty are random makers. We're all people who are engaged in the different art worlds that are out there, exhibiting all over the place, making work constantly. So you're working with people who are working in the field. So it's experiential learning from the outset. Here's some quick examples of things that happen here. We do an eyeball exhibition. It's a long story why it's called Eyeball. If you're curious, I can tell you about it someday. It's kind of funny. It's kind of weird. It's a little bit creepy. I'll save that for another time. But it's an exhibition of work from the previous year. So every year we ask all of our faculty to nominate 1 or 2 artists from courses they taught in the previous year, and we do a kind of summation exhibition the next year. So students can see the kind of work that their peers are creating, and we get into the practice of exhibition making. If you happen to be in town, we have the current eyeball exhibition up now. It just opened. Come check it out. See some of the work of the students who are in visual studies. You can see the kinds of work, everything from weird installation, photography, video, performance. It's all here. And then in your final year, if you're a visual specialist, we do a thesis exhibition. And we have the students find a space offsite and organize their own exhibition. So this is one from 2 years ago called Still There Are Seeds to Be Gathered, which was a fantastic exhibition. And you can see the kinds of work that are being done here. And this is open to the public. There's a little publication. There's a lot of enthusiasm around this exhibition. And students get into the practice of exhibiting. And this also means that you get to rehearse exhibition. And you get to rehearse exhibition, but it's also public. So people can come. This is a real exhibition. And this means the students spend a lot of time figuring out what their work is, but also how their work exists in the world. For me, fundamentally, I kind of have a philosophy that art doesn't really become art until it engages with its various publics. And how better to do that than a public exhibition? You can see all sorts of kind of work here. So displays of artists' publications and research, and then installations with all sorts of found materials. And you have painting, but painting that has special, I mean, this was about certain mythical Filipino creatures done in this beautiful, lush, strange painting that had, it's weirdly photographed. The lighting on it was amazing. And here's a work, another artist book that was being made that became a much more sort of interactive work. There's the book itself, but also bits of the research that led into the book itself. There's also opportunities for travel courses. A couple of years ago, I took students to Fogo Island, which is an island off of Newfoundland that really was an island that came upon hard times when in the 90s the commercial fisheries stopped and the way of life of a lot of these people was lost. And basically, a foundation was formed that put art at its center. So there are a lot of artist studios that were formed, and they brought artists because they think differently to this island to help foster other ways of understanding economies, travel, just how to be. And then they have also built this, you can see in the slide here, what in the bottom left there, there's this inn. So this inn is for geotourism, but all of the money that comes through this inn gets fostered back to the island through entrepreneurial loans, grants, gifts. They do public works, but all of this has art at its center. So I got to take 8 students over the summer. I know it doesn't look like summer. It snowed in May because it's a remote island, but this is a summer opportunity that comes up sometimes. There's other exhibitions that we do. The Shelley Peterson exhibition happens through the Art Museum. So if you're not familiar, the Art Museum is a proper museum that is based at the University of Toronto. So you have access to world-renowned artists who are exhibiting all over the world, and they are brought into exhibitions at the Art Museum. And your work gets to be put in conversation with some of these artists at the Shelley Peterson exhibition. And it's a tri-campus exhibition. So work by students from University of Toronto Mississauga, University of Toronto Scarborough, and St. George campus are all brought together into this exhibition. So these are just some of the opportunities you get as a student in this program. And there's other stuff. You also have access to our master's program. So we have the Masters of Visual Studies, where we have a very small cohort of artists and curators who are making exhibitions that you can see at the Art Museum and at the Daniels Architecture and Design Gallery. And you have access to these these graduate students, and they can tell you about their experiences as practicing artists as well. And you get to see their exhibitions and have access to how they work. So it's almost like a soft mentorship in a way. And again, as I said, we're here to help you foster your practice. We want you to take advantage of U of T's network of resources. And we have studios and seminar environments and small courses. I think our largest, other than the 2 lecture courses you have to take in first year, our largest courses are capped at 25 students, which means you have a small group that you can foster your own practice, create a sense of a cohort, create a sense of a peer group. And then we move into the critique process of your work. Critique is fundamental to how we learn. It's an amazing kind of group learning where you're not just listening to the professor talk about your work, but your peers are talking about your work. They're bringing their own experiences, their own synthesis of your ideas to bear on what you present. And I know the word critique sounds negative, sounds sometimes scary, but I fundamentally believe that critique is a really generous process. I know it might sound hard, but people are giving of themselves, their mental energy to think about your propositions, to think about your work. And you get to learn your own voice in making through their feedback. So it can be hard, it can be really rewarding, it can be really uplifting critique. And it's a really unique form of learning that exists only in visual studies. This kind of learning doesn't happen anywhere else in the university. We also are connected to, through our faculty, lots of things both locally and internationally with arts professionals and galleries and museums. But the Daniels is also a co-publisher of one of the leading art journals in the world. And it's co-published between the University of Chicago and University of Arts London. And so we're already part of an international network where some of the leading art discourse and criticism is being produced. That we are one of the co-publishers. So that's happening right here. That's how much we are on the pulse of contemporary art discourse. So I'll breeze through this part very quickly. You can get a quick glance at some of the faculty you might be working with. you're in this program. And you can see all sorts of different kinds of practices that are happening here. Everything from someone like Katie Lyle, who is a painting and drawing professor, who also does sort of spatialized painting and drawing installations, to Barbara Fisher, a world-renowned curator who has curated the Venice Biennale, the Canadian Pavilion for the Venice Biennale, and countless other museum exhibitions. She's also the director of the Art Museum at the University of Toronto. Charles Stankiewicz, who is an artist who makes work around a lot of sort of sculpture, moving image, but a lot of it is about military imaging, deep geological time. It's absolutely deeply researched and fascinating and super complicated, but really, really seductive and rich. This is me, from everything from found moving image works to a series of desks and prints in Vienna and Houston, all sorts of things. I won't spend too much time on me. Jean-Paul Kelly, another artist who uses a lot of moving image work, but also a lot of drawing practices, who's a really brilliant artist and brilliant thinker. Karen Craven, who works in sculpture and installation, often around textiles, but using textiles as a kind of sculptural material and mining their sort of the history of textiles in the process. Louis Jacob, an artist and curator who's done a lot of public artwork, has been in Documenta, which is a sort of big exhibition in the art world, also has worked as a curator a lot. So you have all these kinds of thinkers happening around your practices. Mitchell Akiyama, who works a lot with sound and sound installation. Morris Lum, a photographer who works on Chinese diasporas and Chinatowns, just had a new massive book come out all about this series of photographs he's been taking around the world in various Chinatowns. Sue Lloyd, an artist who works between photography and drawing. Sarah Robayo Sheridan, another curator who has curated numerous exhibitions all over the place. And Zach Blass, who is a world-renowned artist who does stuff about biopolitics, about the politics of tech bros in Silicon Valley, what this does to bodies, what this does to queer bodies. It's a fascinating, deeply researched process. He's got a lot of books out there. He does a lot of critical writing as well around his practice. I might stop sharing my screen now. I talked a lot, and as I promised, I talked very quickly. But I'd love to take this time now to turn things over to all of your questions. I'm sure you have a lot. I know I went through it quickly, but I want to give as much time to you to ask the things that you need to ask.
Okay, so lots of questions did come in while you were presenting, and I'm sure more will follow. So there are a few questions about admissions. And so the first one is about the expected kind of grades that you might be looking for from applicants.
I mean, Gwen, you might have a better sense of the actual grades. I'll be totally frank. When we're looking at applicants, those of us who are on the admissions committee, we don't actually look at your grades. We look at your work. We look at your essay, your one idea stuff. That's what we base our criteria on. And we also understand that artists, I mean, it might be a bit of a cliche, but sometimes artists have not been the best performers at school. Sometimes traditional learning environments are challenging for artists. So we want to leave space for those whose practices can speak for themselves and whose essays can speak really, really strongly. But I do know that this is the University of Toronto and there is a competitive grade average to get in. But I think we're usually in like the mid 80s. Gwen, is that sort of right?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to say because it does change every year and it depends on the pool of applicants that are applying. And so generally, yes, to be competitive, I would say mid to high 80s, low 90s would be competitive. But as Gareth said, it's a holistic review of the application. And so it's not one piece weighted a specific amount and then another piece weighted another amount. It's a review of the whole application. So there are a number of questions about the portfolio piece as well. So I'll combine these together because they're a little bit related. So what specifically might you be looking for in a portfolio? And then do all of your portfolio pieces need to be of the same? Like, do they have to be related or connected in some way?
So I guess the first thing that I will say is I'd like to caution us calling it a portfolio because it's not a big portfolio. We're talking about 6 images. just six. So choose the six images, and that can include video, that can include sculpture, that can include painting, that can include whatever. The six things that you think best articulate who you are as an artist, or as a maker, or as a curator, or a thinker. We're not necessarily looking for the best technical work. We're looking for interesting people. We also know that not everyone has the same high school experience. Some high school arts programs are amazing and really rich and really robust, but we don't want to let an amazing thinker and artist who's been in a program that might not have had the best high school art we don't want to shut them out. So it's not judging just for technical proficiency. In fact, that's like one of the things I'm least interested in. I'd rather see really rich ideas, a real dedication to your practice. So for some people, putting six images that are all from the same kind of work totally makes sense. And for some people, six images that are vastly different might be a clearer articulation of who they are as an artist and maker. For some people, it might be like four things that they've made, and one, like, I don't know, I said to somebody the other day, like, what was like your most interesting Instagram photo? Like, if your Instagram photo communicates how you think visually, how you think through the world, I'm listening. I'm willing to hear that as a possibility to help articulate who you are. So, same topic, different topic, lots of topics, some things that kind of seem like they're kind of related. It's really a bespoke thing, and it's gonna come down to the individual and your own practice. So all I can say is test it on somebody else. Show somebody else the six images. See what they think. If they think that this shows you who you like communicates who you are as an artist, that's what we want. And maybe if it ties to the one idea essay, that might help. If it helps sort of buttress the sort of what's been written about, we can think about it and tie them together. But there's not one formula, just like there's not one kind of artist. I know that's like kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it is the most honest one.
Is it possible to combine visual studies as like your main area and then also study architecture as maybe another major or a minor?
Yes, is the quick answer to that. And it works the other way around too. A lot of the architecture students take a major in visual studies or a minor in visual studies. And I know a lot of the visual studies students also do architecture stuff the other way around. So you can definitely combine them. And it's like an environment that is really made for that.
So along those same lines, if somebody's in visual studies, but they also have an interest in maths or sciences, is it possible to take math and science courses?
Absolutely. And we encourage that. If you have interests, go follow them. Absolutely follow them, and then bring them back to the studio or not. Keep them separate, whatever. The only restrictions are if there are restrictions from the other faculties. So they might have prerequisites that you need to take, but take whatever your heart desires. I know some people who have gone through this program and done like a specialist in visual studies and a major in math, who are now like I know somebody who's actually now a math professor at CUNY in New York who did visual studies. Like, so if that's your interest, absolutely, and that is for any of the faculties, well, especially arts and science. But like, take anything there that you want, and I really encourage people to like branch out and explore and try things on.
I'll just add to that. If somebody is in high school right now and thinking about doing maybe some math and science courses, it may be valuable to take those high school prerequisites because those likely will be needed if you are planning to take math and science in university. And while it won't be an admission requirement for our programs, you might want to consider just having it. That's entirely your choice, but just something to think about so that when you get here, you're trying to add those math and science courses, you do have the building blocks before that. What kind of possible careers? I know you touched on this a little bit when you talked about some of the alum. What kind of careers do you think students might go into from this degree?
I mean, it's an important question and it's a difficult question because the reality is it's a bachelor's degree. And so many careers these days are asking for people to do things beyond a bachelor's degree. But because it's a bachelor's degree, it also sets you up to study anything else afterwards. From a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a BFA degree, it's harder to then move into another field. Whereas ours, because it's a more holistic degree, it's easier to then move into other fields. But we have had people go into artists, obviously, curators, critics. A lot of people have gone into academia, but we've had people go into finance. We've had, as I mentioned earlier, a math professor. We've had, I know somebody who did this program quite a while back and is literally an astrophysicist. I still don't understand how that happened or really what that is. But so people have gone into everything. We've got people gone into banking. Lots of people have gone into cinema, like into film industries. Um, we've had people go into everything. So it's again, it's I feel like it's another wishy-washy answer, but it's the honest one.
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned that it sets students up well for possible grad studies. Is it possible to maybe talk a little bit about some of the soft skills that students can get from displaying their work, accepting, criticism and feedback on their work, that they might not get in another program because of the uniqueness of the degree?
Yeah, well, I mean, things like critique and displaying your work and thinking through that, it helps you understand just how to walk through the world and be critical of everything you encounter. So that means being critical of the things around you, everything in the built environment, but also means being critical of language, being critical of known structures, the sort of all these institutions that we operate in. So many of our courses start questioning institutional frameworks and how they work, even things like questioning how a university works. I've taught courses specifically on that where students end up writing syllabi as their final projects. So you, as an art student, are creatively thinking critically, and you're taking things like critical theory and art discourse because artists are always thinking about these things in the world. Artists are challenging how we think, challenging how we engage with the world, and so these skills that we foster are with you in all walks of your life. And sometimes it's annoying because you can't turn it off. You'll be in some foreign city and you'll be on the streetcar and you'll be like, how does this work? Like, why are things decided this way? And you get really grumpy, but it makes you interesting and you can always have a fascinating conversation with people who have been through this program. So you also learn skills like how we display things in the world. Think about it. We all have that shelf somewhere where we live that has random objects that we think are important and we think we're tied to for some reason. Maybe it's emotional, maybe it's visual. And there's artists who deal specifically with this phenomenon. And so we are always displaying things in everything we do. Look at how we dress, how I mean, this is like weird studio stuff, but there's stuff behind us. We now have the apparatus to think about these things critically. So display, like how we think about the visual world, how we think about the built world, and then just how we think people think, and how institutions work. And I could go on. Hopefully this helps.
Is it possible if somebody's a current University of Toronto student to still apply to the visual studies program?
Yeah, you can apply to the Visual Studies program. If you have already been taking stuff, let's say in arts and sciences, there's two courses that you have to take, which is the JAV 120 and the JAV 130. So the visual concepts, which is kind of like a contemporary art history course, so we know the context in which we're working. And then JAV 130 is called visual strategies. So it's almost like the intro to studio course. So you take those two courses, and then you apply to the Daniels program, and you can do a minor in visual studies through arts and science. So arts and science already offers a visual studies minor. So all you need to have is those two courses, an average of like 74, 75. So it's pretty easy to get in. We want you here. Um, and then, or you can transfer from arts and science into Daniels. And if you decide to transfer, you basically have to go through the whole application process, but all of the credits you've already taken count. So if you've already taken those courses, you've taken some other visual studies courses, the courses you took in arts and science, they all count. So you might apply to Daniels in your third year or fourth year, and you might only need one or two courses and you're done. We have lots of students who have transferred. Basically, I feel like it's my job to always try to like those students who are like trying on a visual studies course. Often I convert them, and they end up being like, "Oh yeah, this is actually where I want to be," and then they transfer over, and we all have a really good time together.
How many students do you accept into the program each year?
Depends each year. I mean, Gwen, you might have better numbers than I do on this. It's small. As I said, we have a small program, and we need to keep it that way because art classes with lots and lots of people doesn't really work. You don't get the time and attention and critique that you would have if you had a class of 50. So, I mean, Gwen, what is that? I mean, because it's
I think
tricky.
it does change from year to year, but I think it's anywhere between 20 to 40 students each year. But it depends on the applicants and it depends,
Yeah.
of course, on space and availability.
And there have been some years that it's been, I think, close to 60. So it again, as Gwen was saying, it depends on the applicant pool.
If somebody is applying as a mature student to the university, would you be assessing them in the same way that you would somebody who's coming directly from high school?
Yep. Again, we just want interesting people. So you can be interesting coming out of high school. You can be interesting as a mature student. We've had a number of mature students come through the program. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities there. But presumably, if you're a mature student and you're applying, that'll probably come up in your essay. And that's already a way of making yourself sound interesting. You've had lived experience. You've been doing stuff in the world. And I would make sure to highlight that in your essay.
Is there room in the program for somebody coming from more of the performing arts into the visual studies program?
It depends on what you want to do. We do have performance arts classes, but performance art is different from, let's say, theater practice. Um, there's obviously places where they cross over, and there's places where they intersect. I actually started in the theater department many, many years ago before I left to go to visual studies. So I know how these things can slide back and forth. But we're not a theater program. There is the theater program at U of T. But of course, if you're thinking about live art and liveness, and that can be through performance art, through installation, through time-based installation, there's definitely space for that.
Okay. Um, do you share the general acceptance rate for the visual studies program?
Nope.
Okay,
Again, it changes every year as well too.
it does.
So it's that number would I could tell you, but it might mean nothing or it might mislead you.
Uh, are there any game design or 3D animation courses that might be included as part of the visual studies program?
The easy answer to that one is no. The more complicated question is because we're a contemporary art program, basically with a fancy name, visual studies. There is, of course, space for that when, let's say, game design is done for exhibition. When a game is done as part of a gallery exhibition or museum exhibition. But we're not a design program or an animation program that's making video games as video games. So it's not like I'm trying to say video games can't be art. They absolutely can be, and I've seen some really amazing ones. But it's not that we appreciate how artistic they are. It's if they are made under the auspices of art first, and it happens to be a game as the medium of the art, not we want to celebrate how artistic something is. I often talk to my students about having almost two poles. There's arts as a field of discourse, practice, academy, and study, which is what we do here. We're at a university. And then there's being artistic, which is absolutely fantastic. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, they're just different. So somebody who just loves drawing or does anime because they love anime or is making games because they love games, that's fantastic. I wish I had more of those skills myself. But that's not really what we're doing here. We're doing art as a field of discourse. So hopefully that answers it. So it depends on how you're approaching, let's say, game or 3D animation. We had a master's student just graduate last year, and a big part of her practice is 3D animation, but it was 3D animation that you would see in galleries, not, let's say, in online symposia. I hope that answers that. It's an
I,
imperfect science.
I think I understand this question, but I'll try to phrase it accurately. Um, does this program include also architecture? Like, will they be studying design and art as well as architecture studies?
In your first year, sort of. So the first year, all the architecture students, all the visual studies students are taking the same array of courses. And you have like an intro to architectural history, you have an intro to contemporary art history, you have a intro to design, as well as an intro to studio practice. And so the architecture students are um, introduced to a lot of art thinking, and a lot of the artists are introduced to a lot of architectural thinking. So you make this really interesting holistic cohort who's thinking about all these things in complicated ways and looking at how art and architecture bounce off one another, thinking about how the built environment works, thinking about how one moves through a space, which is important when you're thinking about curating an exhibition. But after the first year, you can keep studying architecture and art if you want, or you could say, no, thank you, architecture. I'm just going to do visual studies. Or conversely, and I don't know why you would, you could say, yes, architecture, no visual studies, but that's just me.
How much graphic design would a student be exposed to in this program?
Again, not a lot. Um, of course, design comes into so many of these things, especially things like arts publishing. Um, Design can be part of art, but design is design. We're not making websites, we're not making posters, unless you're making poster as an artwork, which happens. But again, I just want to make sure that we know that like it's not a design program, it's an art program.
So this question is in regards to the admission deadlines, and I don't know if you know them off the top of your head, Gareth. I don't know them off the top of my head either. So I will say this, please check the website for the updated deadlines because I don't want to mislead you. But there's an early application deadline, which has an early deadline for your one idea, which includes the written response, the essay, as well as the images that you would submit. And then there's a second deadline. So please check the website and make sure you have the accurate information. If you apply by the early deadline, we will be sending emails to let you know that, the deadline's coming up to submit your one idea. So we will be in communication with you, but please always check online for the most updated information. Do you have it, Gareth?
I just pulled it up on my phone. It looks like the OUAC deadline is January 15th. And then the supplementary application deadline, so all the bits of your one idea, your essay, and your images is February 2nd.
And that's the final deadline. So there
Okay.
is an early deadline as well.
Yeah, I think did it pass? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
No, it hasn't passed
Okay,
yet. So I
great.
would say if you can apply by the early deadline, you should.
Yeah,
If you can't, then definitely submit by the final deadlines because those are very firm deadlines. So this question is, does the December 2nd deadline also apply to internal transfer students? Typically, I'm not sure actually. Do you know the answer to that question for
yes,
somebody who's
yes,
transferring? It's the
yes.
same
If you're
deadline?
transferring to Daniels, yes, it's the same deadline.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So we have answered all of the outstanding questions. So for all of our attendees, if you have any additional questions for Professor Garrett Long, now is a great time to ask those questions. If you do have questions that come up after today or after we are done talking to you, you can send an email and I'm just going to share that email with you in the chat. So you can definitely send me an email and I will answer that email. So it's futurestudents@daniels.utoronto.ca, and that's just there in the chat. And no additional questions have come in. So I think you have answered all of the outstanding questions.
Great.
And so thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening, and we look forward to receiving your applications very soon.
Oh,
Oh,
two more
oh,
really
two more
quickly.
questions.
Okay.
If there are only 30 applicants accepted to the program, are there any chances at all to get accepted if you attach your one idea closer to the end of December?
No,
As long as you're meeting the deadlines,
as long as you're at the deadline. Yeah.
yes, you will still be considered for admission.
Yeah.
Are you able to apply to multiple programs? I'm not entirely sure what this question means, so I'm going to answer it two different ways. If you are trying to apply to both architectural studies and visual studies, that is not a possibility because it's the same application. If you are applying through the Ontario University Application Centre, with your fee, you generally get three choices at any Ontario university. So any program, any university, they're all through the OUAC. And you can add additional choices beyond that as well, but you usually pay a fee for each additional choice that you add on that. I think this question is in regards to the grades that is being looked for, which we kind of did answer already. So in terms of the grades that you need to have coming into the program, to be competitive, you should be in the mid to high 80s, low 90s for a competitive grades. But as Gareth mentioned, it is a holistic approach. And so the whole application, including your one idea written essay and your submitted images, are all part of the consideration. So it's not just one thing over another. Okay, I think we got all the questions. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.